As usual, I'll wait a couple minutes, let people get logged in. I haven't done dual duty for a couple of years for a Green Bellevue meeting. Actually, I wasn't president last time I did a presentation. So it's exciting. People are going to be tired of hearing me talk for the whole hour and a half. Well, I would like to start with a really quick wrap up from Earth Day month. I know we officially did it in May, but get it out there that we had another fun month of Earth Day activities, both in person and online with our Earth Day passport. So huge thanks to Steve Thyberg for coordinating everything and all of the board members and committee members who got things done. So we had some really great conversations and presentations, especially on our May 1st event. So those are all recorded, and if they are not up, they will be up shortly. I know some of them are on our YouTube channel. So stay tuned for next year. We're already starting the planning process. Other Green Bellevue news, we have a rain garden that we are working on weeding, I believe, on Saturday afternoons. And we have a pollinator garden at the corner of Child Road and Moore Drive that we do work in on Wednesday evenings. So check out our Facebook page for more details and to RSVP. Otherwise, just show up, and if nobody's there and you know what you need to pull, go for it. Any other volunteer opportunities we have, you can find in our newsletters and also posted on Facebook. All right, well, I will go ahead and get started. So my name is Michelle Foss. I am president of Green Bellevue, and I am the director of resource stewardship at Fontenelle Forest. And I have my Fontenelle Forest hat on right now, and we'll be talking about habitat conservation. So I will share my presentation and we'll get going. All right, so my job is technically to oversee the land and facilities here at Fontenelle Forest, but I've also worked as an educator, raptor handler, animal care specialist, and a biologist. So I have gotten to try out a couple of different things, and by far my passion lies with habitat conservation. So today we're going to be talking about both what we do here at Fontenelle on both of our properties, Neil Woods and Fontenelle and Bellevue, as well as some things that you can do at home or some things you can learn more about. So I wanted to start off by sharing these first three pictures. They are from on property. So the first one, there's actually a great blue heron in there. Kind of hard to see because they blend in. But that is actually a spillway up in our Neil Woods property. The middle one is an oak woodland, and that is some phlox in there at Fontenelle. And then the last picture there on the bottom circle is a prairie reconstruction at Camp Brewster, and that is where our shop and office is located. So one of our sites to go visit is the Constitution Tree. It is on the third loop of our boardwalk, and it overlooks the Missouri River. So here are a couple of pictures showing the progression of the land around the Constitution Tree. And I would like to share with you guys a story. So go ahead and close your eyes, because I'm not changing the slide. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this tree. I have many names: fir oak, mossy cup oak, blue oak, and scrub oak. There's a plaque that states my name is Constitution Tree, and that my initial growth ring was in 1731, which makes me 291 years old. I have seen much over the years. When I first sprouted, there was so much sunlight. My neighbor trees were few and far between. The grasses and sedges were waving in the Missouri River breeze, and flowers of every color were blooming. Bees buzzed around, and butterflies flitted back and forth along the ridge. Ants were hard at work gathering food and digging. Soil microbes were supporting the life above. Children would scamper around, gathering grass for thatching, finding firewood, and playing. Elk and deer would graze and browse, and birds of all shapes and sizes would fly through. Periodically, a fire would blaze along the ridge, clearing out the shrubs and re-energizing the soil for the plants. A perfect bur oak nursery if ever there was one, and it was my home. Life was wonderful. When I was about 70, we were visited by a large group of explorers. They took in everything and tried to learn as much as possible. They would take samples, sketch plants and animals, experience everything there was. They were so full of curiosity and excitement. After a brief period, they moved on, and life continued as usual. Right after that was a steamboat voyage up the river with new explorers. There were fewer people this time, and they stayed in a settlement a ways down the river. They were amazed at the wide open ridges and flowing grasses and the huge variety of birds and flowers. Drawings and paintings attempted to capture the beauty of the Missouri River corridor with the prairie-like savanna ridge tops and forested lower slopes. This group of artists and explorers quickly moved upriver, and all was quiet again. Slowly, the children stopped coming, and all fires were quenched by the settlers. There were fewer elk to graze and more shrubs and new, fast-growing trees. And then my neighbor trees, which I had grown up with, were taken, cut down and hauled away as I stood guard over the river and watched, waiting for my turn. But it didn't come. Soon, I was one of only a few mature trees left standing. My neighbors for over 100 years were gone. The grasses were still there, though they didn't cover as much ground anymore. And there were many new shade-giving trees. It was starting to get a little crowded with all the shrubs as well. All of a sudden, there were new grazers. A dairy farm had opened nearby, and the cows were put to pasture around us. As suddenly as they arrived, they were gone. The shrubs started pushing out the sun-loving grasses, and I no longer had new oak neighbors. A road was cut, then allowed to narrow to a foot trail. When I was a little over 200 years old, things began to change rapidly. The river was moved. The course of the river was deliberately changed. It became narrower and deeper. The bends and meanders were removed. There were large boats carrying heavy loads up and downstream. More and more shrubs and fast-growing trees moved in, choking out the grasses and flowers, and bringing shade-loving understory plants with them, crowding out the open savannas. And still, I was a sentinel watching over the ridge and the river. With no natural fire, the land quickly filled in. Deer found it difficult to move between the shrubs and trees. My acorns didn't even make it to the ground in some areas. There was not enough sunlight reaching the ground for any of the original savanna plants to sprout anymore. The grasses were few and far between. My once open, sunny oak nursery had become a closed canopy forest with only a few types of plants. Very recently, some of the smaller trees were removed. Then fire was reintroduced. It was such a relief. After nearly 200 years without natural fire, the heat of flames once again touched my bark and lower limbs. My leaves had mixed with other oaks and hickories up on the ridge to carry the flames. The unwanted forest saplings were top-killed, making way for more sunlight to filter through to the forest floor. More and bigger shade-loving trees were removed, creating more space for us and allowing even more sunlight to the waiting plants below. There was enough space created that machines were brought in to mow the understory vegetation in an effort to mimic the old grazers. The land was opening up again, and then more fire. The flames would slowly consume our leaves, killing the shrub and shade-loving plants, and creating space and sunlight for the savanna plants to begin to grow yet again. More shade-loving trees were removed, and even more sunlight penetrated to the floor. And more. Grasses are coming back as the prairie flowers that I had missed for so long. Now, people were coming to catalog the plants and survey the birds and trap and identify the insects. And others were leading groups and explaining what I've been through in the past nearly 300 years. As my branches and leaves reach out for the sun without the shade trees and shrubs, I reflect on the changes over the years. As my roots begin to grow tired and I produce fewer acorns, I remember my nursery area. The land is not perfect, and my soil is still missing components, but the sun and space feel so good. I feel the wind through my leaves and branches again, and there is hope for new life. So while trees don't actually have feelings like that and can't really tell a story, these are all based on actual history that happened. The Lewis and Clark expedition, Prince Maximilian came through. There was a dairy farm up around the Constitution tree in the early 1900s. So all of these things are just a way to tell the story of the land. So these pictures show a couple of different timelines. The early 1920s is after the dairy farm, and you can see that there are quite a few trees up there. That is not the open savanna prairie area that was there in the early 1800s. And then by 2017, there were shrubs and trees everywhere. So you can see that the Constitution tree doesn't look super great. It's got a couple of dead branches. And then in 2020, unfortunately, I took the picture in the dormant season, so you can't see all the leaves, but you can see that there are definitely fewer trees around it. And if you head out to our third loop now, you can see how open it is and the variety of flowers and grasses we have out there. So this is the top left picture is an artist rendering of what the Missouri River area and the Lusk Bluffs, both here in Iowa, would have looked like pre-settlement. And you can see some summer homes up on the ridge, and you can see the slight bit of agriculture that the Native Americans had along the river. The picture on the bottom right is a Carl Bodmer painting of the initial trading post that was here on site of Fontenelle that became the original site of Bellevue. Carl Bodmer was the painter that came with Prince Maximilian. So here are some more pictures of the 1920s. So the top picture is actually looking out from the forested area out onto the river. So you can see that there's still some pretty quickly growing trees up there, and that the grasses don't look all that exciting, and there aren't too many flowers. And then in the right picture, it was taken around the same time as the previous picture, so the 1920s. So in the last 6 years, we've embarked on an oak woodland restoration project. And this picture is typical of the deep forested areas. And that is what it should look like on the lower slopes of our hills, down towards the river and towards more of the bottom of our ravines. Unfortunately, with the lack of fire and lack of grazers, that disturbance that caused the proper conditions for oak savanna and oak woodland, we ended up seeing shade tolerant trees move up the slopes. There was a lot more invasion by exotic plants or invasives. We are seeing severely reduced regeneration of oak trees. We also have a lack of diversity at all levels of all of our systems because we've removed what kept systems in checks and balances. So what are the benefits of restoration? We see less soil erosion. If you have hiked in the Lusk Hills any time recently, You probably have encountered trails that are ditched out, or there are large steps in it, or you can see huge gullies as you're hiking. And part of that is the degradation of the system. By having the understory flowers and grasses, it holds the water better and it helps it filter through the soil instead of running off the top. There's an increase in diversity. Because we're increasing the number of types of systems by creating oak savanna and woodland and prairie reconstructions, you have different types of plants and different habitats. So that is an automatic increase in diversity, as well as the fact that there are just a larger variety of plants in a more open system. So along with those plant varieties, you have different birds and you'll have different insects that come into these areas. You have better soil organic matter creation. So when you just have big trees that fall and die, that actually does not create soil quick enough for the forest floor to be able to use it in a really great way. If you look at how prairie soil and some of those open areas filter through the decomposing matter, it's more quickly usable. So both of those systems need their decomposition certain ways. So this will help, like I said initially, with the erosion, but it'll also help provide better soil for the future. When we have an increase in intact systems, we have that increase in the fungal component as well. A healthy forest needs to have healthy mycorrhizal fungi, which is the fungal networks underground that help shuttle nutrients back and forth between trees. You also have an increase in all ecosystem services. Savannas are highly popular for people and animals alike. It serves that park look, but it also provides a sense of open space while still having some cover. We also are seeing more efficient control of invasive plants through prescribed fires. With restoration, we are able to provide more fuel for our fires and to be able to shade or open the canopy and create more sunlight, which is helping with certain invasive plants. We are starting to see native plants pop back up. We have had 2 restoration areas out on ridge tops where we have seen big blue stem come back from the seed bank that was there before. So that's always exciting. With more open canopy in these areas, it also helps with breezes. You'll see fewer mosquitoes, and you can actually see the wildlife that's up there. So we're also creating a mosaic. So we don't have, or we don't want hard transitions between habitats. We want everything to flow and to seamlessly fit together. So how do we do this? Our primary method is invasive species control. And you can see here, we do it a few different ways. So we literally pick weeds. So the picture in the top left is some volunteers and staff who are picking Dame's rocket, and we pile it and burn it because Dame's rocket will reroot and also will go to seed even after being pulled. So we can't just toss it. In the bottom picture, we have an intern who is brush cutting sweet clover. So this is a hot and not fun invasive control method, but that is how we control sweet clover and some of our other invasives out in prairies. And the last picture, where it kind of looks like a dog peed on a tree, that is actually basil bark spraying, and that is where we apply herbicide directly to the bark of Tree of Heaven. And what this does is it allows the tree to absorb the herbicide. Tree of Heaven is a horrific invasive that, when cut or damaged, will send out a response to its roots that creates suckers out of the roots. So if you cut it down, it will just send out some more that you'll have to deal with later. So we apply herbicide to the bark around the tree to kill it standing. We do not have the time, over 2,000 acres and 5 full-time permanent staff members, to be able to go out and constantly treat tree of heaven. We also accomplish our goals by thinning. So we have a couple different methods. We've got the brush cutting again. We did hack and squirt, where we will use a hatchet to hack into a tree and then apply very specific herbicide into that hatch mark. And that allows the tree to die standing, which provides some more habitat, but it also slows the opening of the canopy. If we open the canopy too quickly, we end up with an even worse invasive problem. We also do a method called girdling. You can see in the top right corner that we will use a chainsaw to cut through the living layers of the tree. Sometimes we use herbicide, depending on the species. Most of the time, we just leave it cut. And that accomplishes the same thing as hack and squirt, but on bigger trees typically. We also use mechanical methods, such as our skid steer with a brush mower. And we use prescribed fire here at Fontenelle Forest. So I want to share this video with you so you kind of get an idea of what prescribed fire looks like in our oak woodland reconstructions, because it is not a wildfire.
Burning settlers unit. Say that again.
That is awesome.
Woohoo! Whoa, getting some heat on this slope.
We've got smoke lifting now too. So we were pretty excited because we had not seen good fire in this area, because typically there wasn't enough oak leaves on the ground because there were too many shrubs and trees in the way. So we were very excited to see the fire actually go up the slope. So this is a picture of a map that includes the Constitution tree, which is that blue dot, but it also shows some other features of the third loop of our boardwalk. So the green line is our plant survey transect. The red lines are our insect survey. And you can see that pink line, that's an old trail that went through there. That was the road referenced in the story. So we have embarked on a couple of different surveys and monitoring to see what we've got out there and to see how our restoration is affecting various components. We know we're making changes, but we do not always know exactly what the effects of those changes are. So in 2015, we received a grant from Nebraska Environmental Trust with a renewal in 2018 that included conducting surveys as part of this grant for oak woodland restoration. Along with those surveys, we said that 10 years from then, we would repeat all of the surveys and look at change over time. Some of the areas had restoration work done, some of the areas did not. So we need a reference point. We need to know what we have, what should we have, and then look at what changed after doing some work. And then you change how you do things if you're not getting the intended results. So our vegetative surveys were very interesting. We used 100-meter transects, and then we put this square down, and our botanists identified every plant in that square, and we looked at a lot of things. So we looked at how many trees were along the transect, what they were, the abundance of certain invasives, so that when we go back in another couple of years, we'll be able to see what's changed in different areas. So this is actually a picture from the third loop transect, which had the highest floristic quality index value, which means it had the highest amount of diverse and savanna-specific plants or conservative plants. So these are plants that are very highly desirable. This particular area of the third loop had been receiving thinning and burning before we started a more concentrated effort. It had been burned once before 2015, and it had been thinned slowly before that. So we tried to burn our property once a year, and depending on the area, at different times a year to produce different results. Another survey we did was breeding birds. This is a survey where we had people go out to various points in the forest, as seen in this map, not the ones in the water, and listen and look for birds. And they stood there for 5 minutes and marked everything they saw and heard, species, male or female, if it was sight or sound, and any other information that they could find out from that. And here is our perceived total abundance. So we just had people go out and do the data collection, and we have not actually analyzed this data other than making some charts that show the perceived abundance. So that means how many birds of each species were detected over the 3 years we did the survey. Because we are a small enough spot and we had too few numbers to really make it statistically significant, we did our surveys over 3 years to create one baseline file. So we had lots and lots and lots of house wrens every year. And house wrens are generalist species, which means they don't care what habitat it is, they're going to find a place to live. Some of our other birds that are pretty frequent, the red-eyed vireo and the black-capped chickadee, which are residents of different times that are often seen here. Our surveys were done in June, so it was the breeding season. My favorite survey to help with was the insect survey because I know the least about insects. So over the first couple of years, we found 500 different species of insects, several of which were previously unknown on the properties. So we had a couple identified that are species of concern by the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission and the Nebraska Natural Legacy Plan. So these are big deals, and that means that the habitat that they are found in, which is oak woodlands, is a very important habitat to keep and maintain as they are not doing so well. So in addition to those 3 extensive surveys that we've done, we also have ongoing butterfly surveys. We have 2 volunteers who come and walk every week. They walk the same route, except for when we close trails for various reasons. And they also compare Fontenelle to Lauritsen Gardens, which is kind of neat. We have bat research that's been happening on property for over 25 years in conjunction with UNO. We have informal plant surveys. We also have informal deer surveys. Our biologists and interns and rangers also do tree canopy and density surveys. And we are looking at invertebrates. So not just specific insects, but anything that doesn't have a spine. Some of the things we'd like to see in the future are fungi. We don't know exactly what we have out there. We would love to check out what we have on our floodplain. We'd like to do some soil sampling, and we have some really cool seats at the base of the hills that we would like to see what's going on there and how it's improving or changing with various restoration. In addition to the actual work we are doing on the land, we participate in outreach and education. So here at Fontenelle, we have education programs. We see school groups, we see scout groups, public programming, and our summer camps. And we embed everything we do into those programs. We do community meetings. We attend conferences and seminars where we are actually speakers for some of those. And we have some advisory roles in different organizations. For our outreach, we participate as board members in other organizations. We have a lot of community involvement. We do neighbor visits, land assessments, especially if they're right by the forest and they're concerned about invasives and want to know how they can integrate with forest restoration. We do blog posts. Right now, we have a series every month where our volunteer botanist, Drew Granville, posts what flowers you can expect to see coming up that month. We do presentations and talks like this one, and we also post on social media. So what is our long-term vision? I've talked a lot about what we do, but why? Why do we think that this is the right thing to do? Well, part of that is examples of success with some of our partners. Indian Cave State Park has been doing this a little bit longer than we have and have seen some really great results. Hitchcock Nature Center over across the river with Potawatomi County Conservation is about 10 years ahead of us in restoration, also with good results. Timber Hill Oak Savanna in Iowa is a private land where they have seen significant increases in all of those benefits I talked about earlier on their property, just from implementing prescribed fire and embarking on targeted thinning. In the future, in addition to maintaining and growing our oak woodland restoration, we are looking at floodplain restoration. First step, though, is assessment and funding and planning. We truly do not know what all we have on our floodplains. Targeted invasive control is already occurring down there, and we'd like to implement prescribed fire. We did have a wildfire in the Fontenelle floodplain in April, and while we anticipate primarily ecological benefit, that was not how we wanted to do that. We'd like to set up long-term monitoring on our land, both in the floodplain and the uplands, and use citizen science for that. And we also have some specific projects and phases that we need to define to be able to move forward once we have an assessment of what we have. So I mentioned briefly that we have partners. So Fontenelle Forest works with all of these groups and more in order to get work done. This doesn't only mean work done on Fontenelle land. We do work with our partners because in order to get any work done anywhere, we have to do a little bit of work everywhere. Fragmentation of habitats is a real problem, especially in the oak savanna arena along the Missouri River. We have a very rare system that is disappearing, and only by working together are we going to be able to work with what we have and to improve it and hopefully hang on to that less than 1% of oak savanna that we still have. So these pictures are some examples of some partner work we've done. The top left picture is a prescribed fire that we did with Pheasants Forever out in Seward. The bottom left is a prescribed fire we did with Audubon Society of Omaha at Cumming City Cemetery, which is a remnant prairie. And the big water picture on the right is from a cleanup site that we participated in with Missouri River Relief. So real quick, I wanted to show you guys a couple of pictures from our wildfire. So again, not necessarily ecologically horrific. However, it did cost a lot more than if it had been a prescribed fire. This fire affected 430 acres on Gifford Point, and that included Fontenelle Forest land, Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, Gifford Point WMA, and some of the city of Bellevue land where the fire actually started by a couple of cars. So the bottom picture is from our Great Marsh. So it actually burned along the railroad tracks as well as the far side of the marsh. So we were able to stop it before it hit the boardwalk or our bridge or our bird blind, largely in part due to our training and also the fact that we have staff members who do wildfire suppression in the summer. The fire got really, really close to our wetlands boardwalk, and it actually stopped right at the boardwalk. So we were very excited to see that. We did have some firebrands or burning embers go all the way across our marsh from where it was burning to by our bird blind and our boardwalk. But we were able to contain it and then mop it up so that it didn't relight. So with all of the things we are doing, that's only part of it. So we need help from pretty much everybody. I encourage all of you to ask questions, do your own research, look into other habitats that may have been around here. There are multiple different habitat types that you could find around the Omaha area. Earlier, I mentioned fragmented habitats, and that's where you have natural area that's broken up by human area, either agriculture, even parks, houses, cities, yards, roads, whatever. So fragmented habitat, not so great. One of the ways that we combat this is with yard habitat, which is good. However, as with all ecological concepts, there's a continuum. Not all fragmented habitat is bad. Some of it can actually serve to increase biodiversity if done correctly. And sometimes yard habitats are not as great at providing the natural habitat that a lot of the insects and animals are looking for. So not everything is bad or good. It fits somewhere along in the middle. Yards are a really interesting way of looking at habitat because they're micro habitats and they can serve a wide variety of things. The benefit of yard habitats and micro habitats is that it does provide an oasis for migratory birds in particular, and sometimes migratory insects as well. If you don't have a lot of yard habitats near each other, it's really hard sometimes for those animals to find yard habitats. So working with your neighbors is an excellent way to create multiple yard habitats in an area, which increases the amount of habitat available. So this is my yard. We are getting rid of the grass. We are smothering it. We ended up using black plastic, and it took about a month for us to figure out the right ratio of weights to plastic. And we still have weeds and various things popping out underneath the plastic. Along our house, we do have some native prairie plants growing. You can see one side is doing better than the other. We also have a small little bur oak tree and a red oak tree in our yard. What we are going to be doing is taking that plastic off at the end of the growing season. We are going to very shallowly till because we have a sprinkler system, and we are going to plant with low-mow or eco-friendly fescue mix. We are not replanting the whole yard, however. We are going to also have native plantings mixed in, both some native grass and some native prairie plants. We have full sun in our front yard for most of it, but we also have a depression in our front yard, so there's a wetter area. So we'll have to look at what our micro topography looks like to determine where things go. So we will be planting back less lawn and more natives. We also get funny looks from our neighbors sometimes, but that's okay. And we do have a sign posted out front so people can see what we're doing. So that is all I have. If you have more questions, you can get a hold of me at work at these areas. This particular picture, which did not blow up well, was one I took back in March after it finally got warm enough for some of our flowers to pop out. And this is a native flower called bloodroot that grows really, really well in our prescribed fire areas in the woodlands. And there is a bumblebee curled up in the flower as well. It was not a super warm day, so it was probably trying to get some warmth. All right. So does anybody have any questions? That was a lot in a relatively short amount of time. All right. So I am not a yard expert. In fact, that is something I really don't like doing is yard work, hence the smothering to create a much easier and more sustainable way to do it. So are there any of the attendees here who have some tips and tricks for creating more sustainable lawn or yard or microhabitat? It's definitely harder to do a presentation when you're not in a room with people and can't interact.
We do have one question. Do you consult with private landowners to restore/recreate native habitat? We're doing 2 acres in prairie.
We do. We typically are more focused around either Fontenelle or Neil Woods, but if you have questions or concerns, we are happy to help with that. We do work at a landscape level. We have 2,100 acres that we are trying to take care of, but we are happy to help out with as many resources as we can. We are not paid consultants, however. Fontenelle Forest is a nonprofit, and yeah, but we do that as kind of a community service. So Kathy, you mentioned you're doing 2 acres in prairie. What kind of things are you looking at removing, and what are you looking at putting in its place? Oh yeah, black locust is a really not fun invasive. We did a huge cut project with black locust about a year ago along History Trail. Yeah, sweet clover is not fun either. Like I said, we typically just cut it. It is a biennial, so you do get a break every year unless you have multiple populations. So that's fun. Pheasants Forever Pathways for Wildlife is an excellent program. For anybody else who may have land, it's a great way to do habitat restoration on your own land. They can help do cost share for seed, herbicide for invasive control, brush management, and prescribed fire if you live in an area where that's acceptable. So we have worked with Blair Fire Department before. Sometimes for Cumming City Cemetery, they're the ones that are on call. I recommend working with Pheasants Forever and working on a burn plan and making sure you have everything you need ahead of time. It's always an uncertainty when working with fire departments because their job is to prevent fire. So Nebraska is one of the many states where there's not really good precedent set for prescribed fires and liability. So the fire departments are not interested in potentially taking on liability. So we work at Fontenelle with 3 fire departments. We work with Bellevue Fire, we work with Fort Calhoun Fire, and we work with Ponca Hills Fire. And we have been building relationships with those 3 fire departments for 6+ years. And there are still times when we would like to burn, but they would rather we not. So yeah, absolutely. I can help you out with some potential resources that can help burn. You are welcome. Any other questions or comments?
What is the trickiest invasive that you've dealt with so far?
Great question. It actually depends on the location. So we have honeysuckle, hammer honeysuckle, and Tartarian honeysuckle. It's the bush honeysuckle that people still plant in their yards because they think it's pretty. And that will grow on steep slopes. So that's not fun. As far as the hardest to eradicate, Tree of Heaven is right up there because it's so intensive, but also Dame's Rocket. It is a mustard plant and it produces thousands of seeds, some of them twice a year. So that's really not easy to get under control. It also doesn't have a preference as to where it lives. It's happy in full sun as well as full shade. So that one's one of our harder ones as well. We spend a lot of time and effort on a lot of our invasives, especially where we've already done some work. And this is to allow the natives to be able to get to a place where we don't have to work so hard as humans to eradicate invasives. So it's pretty important to us to get rid of as much as possible. We do not expect to ever get rid of everything, but we are trying to control it to the point that the natives at least have a chance to get going.
Where do you guys get most of your like native prairie seeds?
That's a great question. So we do collect some on our own property. We also have a partnership with Audubon Society of Omaha where we can collect certain seeds at certain times on their prairies. There's a couple of other prairies that allow us to do some collection that we also do some work for. We also purchase some of our seed from Prairie Plains Resource Institute. So they are a native local ecotype grower in the area. And when I say local ecotype, that means within about 100 miles. So that it provides some biodiversity to what we already have here, but it's also local enough that we're not importing seed from, say, southern Missouri, where there may be differences in the plants that are genetically from there than there are from up here. Collecting and processing seed is very time consuming and intensive. We do have a machine that helps us break up the seed and helps us filter it, but we don't have enough seed source on our own property to be able to reseed everything we would like to. We also don't always reseed. Some of our oak woodland openings that we've done, there's enough of the remnant plant community that we don't do any seeding and see what happens. And a lot of our prairie reconstructions and some of our more degraded areas, we have to overseed. Ooh, question about permanently eliminating large tree of heaven. There are some huge ones on the acreage before it was bought. Tree of heaven is a really horrible tree, not only alive, but dead. They get really brittle and break easily. So we have managed to kill some really big ones using the basal bark spraying method. You have to go from the root collar up higher and paint all the way around the tree, so it uses more herbicide. The other thing you can do if the acreage is small enough or you have the ability to go back out there is you can cut them down. Just be prepared to attack all of the small ones that grow up in its place. Oh, the Constitution tree. Yes, the Constitution tree can be seen right off of the third loop of our boardwalk. There is a tree and a plaque that talks about it briefly. It talks about the initial growth ring and when it was dedicated. And it quite literally does look out over the Missouri River. So if you have the opportunity, come visit us at Fontenelle and head out on the boardwalk to our third loop. You're welcome. Another note on Tree of Heaven is some cities also have programs where they will cost share Tree of Heaven treatment as well, because it is that bad. I know back on the East Coast that there are some huge projects going around to eradicate it. It was initially sometimes planted as erosion control along roadsides, and it has outcompeted all native growth in some areas. So it's definitely a huge issue. It also smells bad. When it is flowering, there's just a bad smell. I was talking to our interns about it a couple weeks ago. The typical thing we say is it smells like rotting peanut butter. Somebody also has told me they think it smells like moldy Cheerios. But it's a very unpleasant smell. And that's actually one way to tell it apart from walnuts, because they have very similar leaf structures, the way it smells. Walnuts have more of an astringent lemony scent, almost like lemon pledge. And all you have to do is take a leaf of either tree and smell it. All right, well, if there are no other questions, I would like to thank you for spending some time on this absolutely beautiful June afternoon with us to hear about some habitat restoration that we've been working on and a couple things that you can do. I will get back to Kathy on some information and resources. Oh, yes, Sherry, that is terrible. Along fence lines is a really difficult place for Tree of Heaven treatment. Maybe talk to your neighbors and see if they're willing to either help you with it or at least let you deal with it. We have a neighbor up at Neil Woods that has quite a bit of tree of heaven on their property line. And it's taken a little while, but we're finally getting to the point where they're allowing us to treat it on their property. So next month, July 10th, 1:30 to 3, also via Zoom at this point, we have Scott Bartlett, who's a master gardener and has a very cool garden that he would like to give us a tour of. So in addition to having this program, we are also looking for videographers. We have various projects where we would like to bring in some information from other sources, and instead of descending groups upon people's houses or yards, we would like to do some video tours. So if anybody has suggestions of amateur videographers who might be willing to help us out, please let us know. You can reach me at michellef@greenbellevue.org, or you can reach our admin, who is actually Brianna, on with us today, at admin@greenbellevue.org. Sherry, I like the way you think. She said her husband just retired, so it's a great new project for him. If you have any suggestions or requests of program topics, please also send that our way. If we don't have suggestions, we make it up ourselves. And while our board is made up of sustainability and environmentally friendly minded people, we're always happy to have suggestions. So let us know how we can provide information to you. Brianna, do you have anything else to add?
No, you covered it perfectly.
All right. Well, thanks again and have a great afternoon. We'll see you next time.